Aha! This is Laborc, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. First, I cover the base with Tondia brown. I use a dry brush for that, and I wipe off the excess on a paper towel. The brush is completely dry when I dip it in the paint pot, and I'm not removing all the paint to a dry brush effect. I just remove most of the paint. I cover all the base except the metal pipes on the back and the front. I mix Paintlist brown to Tondia brown and switch to a regular brush. I paint the skulls and bones on the base, leaving a little bit of that dark brown between each of them to make them more separated from each other. I try to leave all the eye and nose holes black or brown, depending on how hard you went with the dry brush in the previous step while figuring out the shapes. I highlight the skulls with Paintlist brown. I pick out the more detailed parts on them by painting the brow bone and the forehead, leaving just a little bit of brown between the two areas. Light is coming from the left, so I try to leave a bigger shadow area on the right side of the skulls. Glaze some Tondia brown back to the shadowy areas to make the transition smoother. I move the brush from the Paintlist brown layer to the Tondia brown layer every time. I give all the skulls around 3 to 4 layers. After that, I go back with Paintlist brown and do the motion to the opposite direction, moving the brush from the Tondia brown layer to the Paintlist brown parts. I even glaze over the little recesses between the brow bone and the forehead if I found the recess shadow too hard and dark, since most of the skulls face up towards our light source. A too dark recess shadow wouldn't make much sense. If you ever wonder about the smoothness you need to achieve, make sure you glaze until all the skulls look like Granny's butt cheek. Now, let's reduce the highlight areas with a mix of ice yellow and Paintlist brown on the little skulls. This will make them pop more from the ground. Maybe it's a little bit high in value, because if you think about it, bone wouldn't be this clean if they were decomposed on the ground, since it would collect a lot of dirt. But I think these skulls are here thanks to the zombie lizard who licked them clean, like Granny when she finds a chicken leg in her soup. The dirt part, I mixed some Nurglinging to the Tondia brown and picked out some bumpy parts. hangs out in the sewers, so I guess it's some dried up sewage waste that he's nesting on. So these desaturated colors would make sense. After that, I reduced the highlight areas with Nurgling green to pick out some details on these little bumps. It's a bit hard to tell what is a bone and what is dirt, but figuring out the details are always the part of the process when painting minis. Now I use the previous mixture to highlight the brick wall. I try to cover more towards the right side. I mostly edge highlight and do some stippling motion along the brick's surface to add some texture to it. It's quite easy to do edge highlight all of them and try to make an overall gradient on the back in a diagonal way to indicate our light source. Make sure you highlight the broken parts on the side, but add less volume to the bricks that are obscured. This brick wall screams for airbrushing, so I get the dry brush once more and use Nurgling green. I remove the excess on a paper towel and completely dry out the brush with the paint. This will make this classic dusty effect, which will work great on the brick wall. I give it multiple rounds of dry brushing and focusing on the right side of the base. I move the brush only one direction in a downward motion so it can pick the raised edges of the bricks easily. A wash to stain the surface of the bricks. I'm not shading, I'm staining, okay? So I create these little drops on the surface. This will dry to a stain-like spot if you use enough of the wash. The key thing here is to have the wash create these little droplets that the surface tension holds together. But if you want to, you can make some spillage-like patterns following the pipes. Not that I think about it, that would have been a good idea, but I'm usually done with the model when I record the voiceover. With a mix of London grey and black, I highlight the metal parts of the base, leaving 30% of the surface black. Once I sketched out the highlight areas, I use some stippling motion to add some texture to these parts. When highlighting cylinder-shaped objects, always make sure your highlights are straight and parallel to the objects you are highlighting. There are some bends on the pipes on the back, so we need to acknowledge this by picking out the parts that light would hit. Basically, any parts that face up, that's where the light would catch the surface, so we need to highlight those sections. I also highlight the black shirt of the character. Less is more, so I only cover around 20% of the shirt. After I'm done with the sketching, I glaze over the black areas of the pipes to smooth out the transition a bit more, giving them 2 to 3 layers. Then I use London Grey and drastically reduce the highlight areas over the pipes. I move the highlights over the light source and I use glazing to blend in the colors. After that, I use light grey to further reduce the highlight areas. On the smaller pipes, I just use stippling to add more texture, and you can see the ratios on the highlights are very important. I try to create a dark NMM, and these small highlights help me with pushing the contrast, but using so little on the surface helps me keeping them to a dark mid-tone. For the maximum highlights, I mix some ice yellow to the light grey, and I use some thin layers to blend in the color. On the little rivets, I applied 2 dots, one on the top and one near the bottom, so it will create a shiny round rivet effect. Lastly, I fixed the rivets with black to make them more defined. Cover the lizard skin with waagh flash. I use 2 thin coats to cover all the skin surface nice and evenly. Make sure you always wait for the first coat to dry before you apply the next one, or I will slap on your hair. To highlight the skin, I use a mix of elysian green and waagh flash. I cover around 80% of the skin and do some edge highlights along the bigger scales. I talked about this in my previous Marvel Zombies videos, but I like to use more desaturated colors for undead heroes of the game. There are so much you can express with the tonal variations and warmth of your colors, and the desaturated colors always create a more colder, lifeless feel. I continue the process with pure elysian green. I leave all the recessed shadows darker and pick out the edges on the tail, and I leave the back of the miniature intentionally darker. highlights, I use a mix of elysian green and ice yellow, adding more edge highlights and volume to the head and all the limbs. This is a laborious process, but the nice thing about the skin is that it's heavily textured, so you don't really need any blending on the surface. The challenging part is to tell where you can sacrifice the recessed shadow for more contrast and where to keep them darker. I think it's okay to move the recessed shadows on the head and the left arm and on the leg in general. Those areas will bring the focal point to the face. I painted the eyes with black off camera to make it easier to see the shape of the eye, because it would be harder to tell where the scaly parts end and where the eyeballs start. Cover the robes with London Grey. Cover all the recesses and parts that you can reach with a brush. For the highlights, I use light grey and cover 80% of the surface. I leave the recesses and lower parts of the robe to the darker grey area, and after I sketch the highlights. I try to follow the shape of the folds to make the highlights more real, and I don't really blend. I just end the highlight where I feel like I have a certain fold shaped in a way that it would naturally create a darker surface next to the highlighted part. Lastly, I mix some ice yellow to the light grey and highlight the robes around the shoulders and elbow that face up. For the eyes, I use pure ice yellow. Always try to reach the eyes from the side, it's way easier in my opinion. Like the rest of the zombie heroes, I like to glaze some fluorescent orange over the eyes and next to the close vicinity of the eye. I use a couple of layers to make the effect more visible, but I only use 2 layers on the eye itself. I cover all the rotten parts of the skin with Drybrush red. I mix some ice yellow to the Drybrush red and pick out different parts to make it look like some flesh showing through. For some reason I jumped to the pants and covered them with naggaroth night while doing the flashy parts. I mix more ice yellow to the mix and reduce the areas inside the previous layer. I think this desaturated pink works really well for rotting flesh and it's super easy to do. Then I painted the tongue, starting with Werber's red and adding more ice yellow for the highlights, as I did for the rotten flesh parts. After that I highlighted the pants with Phenician purple. At this point, if you are a comic book fan or simply looked on the character's ID card, you'd be like, wait, lizard's pants are not purple. And you are completely right, but for some reason I thought they were purple. But we are going to fix that later. I add some ice yellow to push the contrast on the pants and pick out the foils that face toward our light source that is coming from the left. Mixing more purple, I add some halftones next to the highlights of the purple parts, using thinner layers and glazing between the highlight and the midtones. I highlight all the claws that I previously painted black with light gray using some thin layers. After that, I paint the teeth with ice yellow. Try to leave a little bit of black between each tooth for some extra definition, and while doing so, angle your brush completely parallel to each tooth so you can pick them out one by one more easily. Lastly, I glazed some wine red over the midtones to make the pants look more of a dark magenta. I give a thin layer to all the highlighted parts and add more layers to the midtones, so I'm not muting all the highlights with this step. With that, Zombie Lizard is done and ready for the table. A huge thanks to my Patreons who support these kind of videos. With special shout out to Jonathan Rhodes, Cold-Blooded Dom, Trying to Paint Minis, Jonathan Mosner, Glitchy McCrash, and Guillaume Belanger. If you want to support the work of Papa Laborc, you can do that on Patreon, where you will have early access to these videos, or you can get access to PDF guides with other rewards as well. I hope the rest of your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.